And you have all these American great, really diplomats. You have great academics, but they're not really getting heard, I think, because they have the wrong conclusion. I think it's become very ideological. So if you don't support the party line effectively, I don't think they want to hear from you. Doesn't matter if you negotiate an end to the Cold War. Doesn't matter if you were there from Nixon to Saudi Arabia. Nothing really matters unless you say the right things. So.
Hello everybody, this is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and I'm joined today by Dr. Glenn Diesen, who's a professor at the University of Southeast Norway and an associate editor at the journal Russia in Global Affairs. His research focuses on Russian foreign policy and political economy. He has published 10 books and a multitude of journal articles and book chapters, of which I am very proud to say that one of them is in this little book of mine on permanent neutrality, the outcome of a conference we did together back in 2019, which was a very nice experience with Glenn. He's also a very frequent contributor to international media and recently started working with the good people from the 𝗔𝗯𝗏, where he already helped to put together roughly 20 videos with very interesting partners, very interesting people he talks with, and I really highly recommend you watching them. If you like this channel, you will probably enjoy the 𝗔𝗯𝗏 and Glenn's talks there. Glenn Diesen, thank you very much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for inviting me, Pascal.
So, Glenn, there are tons of things I want to talk to you about, but let me maybe start with a recent interview you did on the 𝗔𝗯𝗏 with a great US diplomat who I also had on this channel already, Ambassador Chaz Freeman. His analysis is worth gold, and what was your most important takeaway from that discussion with him?
Well, I before I got in contact with him, I did I wanted to think a bit about what would be his most interesting contribution, because he's got such a long background as an American diplomat, and so again he's quite focused on this conflict with Russia, because he had a central role in developing this new European security architecture centered around NATO after the Cold War. He was working for Nixon when they opened up China in the 70s, and then he was the ambassador to Saudi Arabia. So in all these three countries now, there's a huge shift in terms of the relationship with the United States. So my focus therefore wanted to be the changing world order, as this international system after the Cold War organized around the United States appears to be coming to an end, as the European security architecture in Europe's collapsing, and which has brought us to a war. And also the current arrangements with China obviously isn't working either. So it's either find a diplomatic solution or a war there as well. And of course you have Saudi Arabia, which is the center of the petrodollar, and now they're looking east. They said they're done pleasing the Americans, and now they're selling oil in the Chinese currency. So he's a fascinating person to tie all of this together. And I find that it's also interesting to speak with former diplomats, former state leaders, because they can speak a bit more freely, obviously.
Absolutely. And this, you can see in this talk that he gives how it basically what's currently happening is kind of not breaking his heart. I mean, it's kind of undoing a lot of his work, right? Of like reconciliatory diplomacy and trying to build something that lasts, and it's falling apart, right? So why do you think it is that we have such great US diplomats, and Jack Matlock is another one who you also interviewed? The US State Department is full of people, or at least was full of people, who were extremely smart and well-versed in geopolitics, including, of course, like people like in the past, like George Kennan, right? Do you think there's still people like that? Do you think the State Department has changed? How do you see it?
No, you still have these people. Actually, that's one of the reasons I wanted to do these interviews, because there's all these amazing experts. For example, I also talked to Jack Matlock, interviewed him, because he negotiated an end to a Cold War. He's been saying all along that having a peace with Russia, it's within reach. They don't demand too much, just the basic recognition of the security interests. In other words, also don't push NATO on their border. That's, it's something the United States should be able to sympathize with. They wouldn't accept Russia or China and Mexico. So he has this, very basic, simple, what used to be common sense. And you have all this American great, really diplomats. You have great academics, but they're not really getting heard, I think, because they have the wrong conclusion. I think it's become very ideological. So if you don't support the party line effectively, I don't think they want to hear from you. Doesn't matter if you negotiate an end to the Cold War. Doesn't matter if you were there from Nixon to Saudi Arabia. Nothing really matters unless you say the right things. So I find it to be quite extraordinary, because a lot of the arguments you come with today, be it coming from Matlock or George Kennan, William Perry, the defense minister of Clinton, all these great people, they're all kind of warned about the same thing, but now this is kind of deemed to be Russian propaganda. If you say that, expanding a military alliance to Russian borders is threatening to Russia, then, we don't want to hear it. So it doesn't matter who you are. I think they just don't want to hear from these people.
It's really strange that we are now in this world where the most one-way street in terms of media attention and messaging is coming from the West. This is something that the party is something that we used to associate with the Soviet Union, with China and so on. And I associate it now with the West, and people on YouTube that are very quite influential. Jimmy Dore, Chris Hedges, a lot are pointing out that the US is caught in a uni-party system. Okay, it's two parties on paper, but it's really just one political ideology and nothing to choose from. Would you subscribe to a view like that, or how do you see the US system at the moment?
Well, I think it's a symptom of excessive propaganda, because propaganda often, it exploits this instinct in human nature, which is, we organize ourselves in groups. So you have us versus them, and there's this huge pressure to choose the right camp. So there's no room anymore for objective analysis. If you're, for example, arguing that with China, that abandoning the one China policy, it will lead to war because this is recognized as Chinese territory. They will defend it. People get outraged, but it's just stating again objective analysis. You're trying to interpret the world as it is, and as I see it, I don't see any way of us pulling Taiwan away from China without it sparking a war. So people always reach for these normative arguments that, well, don't they have right for self-determination? What if the people don't want to be a part of China? I can sympathize with all of that. That's the same argument we have in Europe as well. Well, shouldn't the Ukraine choose itself, its security arrangements? Should Russia be able to dictate what its neighbors does? No, I don't think any of this. But still, you have to accept objective reality. If you try to push NATO into, especially Crimea, there's going to be war. I mean, and you can't state this because anything you say is to interpret as choosing another side. So it's and that's the only thing I think people look for. So it's quite impossible to have any sensible discussion now, I think.
It is really interesting, and how it's very, very black and white, and our camp and their camp, right? Because if you talk about the Muslims in Xinjiang, you're basically supposed to make the opposite arguments than when you talk about Muslims in Palestine. I mean, these two cases are so comparable, and yet we're supposed to have like completely opposite approaches, because that's the camps that are being currently like thought about. It's quite strange.
Yeah, I watched this. Was yesterday. You had a CNN interview of Donald Trump, and usually this has become circus, so it's not something one would watch. Too much details, but I found it fascinating because you saw the same questions they used. They asked him, who do you hope will win the war, Russia or Ukraine? And this is the purity test. You have to repeat, yes, Ukraine has to win, Russia has to be defeated. This is the line, and if you fail to
the
repeat
party line.
then you have then you failed, and you're disqualified from polite society.
Yeah.
Even his answer wasn't that bad. I'm not a huge Trump fan, but he was making the argument. Listen, I don't think this is going to be solved by complete victory. We need to prioritize on stopping the killing. Let's sit down and talk. And for me, this is perfect. Like no one wants to talk. What does victory look like? Does it mean that really NATO's going to goose step its way into Crimea? Because I think we'll have nuclear war long before that happens. So what does a victory look like? And no one wants to talk. They just want to repeat the party line, which is, yes, Ukraine must win, without defining what it means.
Trump said the humanitarian thing, and this morning in the New York Times also, of course, berates him for that, for breaking the consensus and questioning, doubting the Ukraine, a U.S. ally, and so on. Glenn, before we move on to the second part, you're a Norwegian scholar, now currently in Norway. I would like your take on Seymour Hersh's analysis or assessment that Norway supported and helped very much in blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline. What do you make of that? Is it believable to you or not?
Well, I wouldn't have any information about it except what's in the article. My only bias is, as a Norwegian, I pray to God it's not true. but I found it. My takeaway was I found it very disappointing how his article was treated, not just in this country but around the world, because he must be the most renowned investigative journalist in the world. He, from his revelation of the My Lai massacre in Vietnam to the Abu Ghraib in Iraq. And suddenly, when this article came out overnight, the journalists made him into some senile old Putinist who's probably been bought or paid for, doesn't know what he's saying anymore. So again, I found it to be weird. One doesn't have to accept anything he says, but I found it very strange the way we had to attack the person right away. And again, I don't think this is not gospel, but it should open up for some discussion, some debate, or independent investigation, because it's a bit strange that the critical infrastructure of Europe was attacked, and there's no debate about it at all. So my main take on this whole thing has been, because I don't sit with an evidence, I can't say who did this, but so what I've been assessing is the reactions and analysis that's come out. Because keep in mind that for years the Americans were sanctioning the Europeans who were cooperating, or companies who were building Nord Stream. You had across the board all these different politicians, all the way to the top in the United States, threatening the pipelines. Many threatening, it would rust at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. It went all the way to Victoria Nuland. You had Ted Cruz saying we have to stop it, all means necessary. And obviously you had Biden himself coming on TV, standing next to Scholz. I think everyone's seen that video now, where he says, if Russia invades, I promise you this will come to an end. And, no matter what, it's not in their control, it's a German pipeline, but nonetheless, he said, we will take care of it. And this is where it becomes very strange, because after it was blown up, you had, I forgot his name, the former defense minister in Poland going, tweeting out, thank you, USA. And you had Victoria Nuland, you had Anthony Blinken effectively celebrating it, saying, we're all delighted, this is a great opportunity. But still, here in Europe, we have to pretend as if America doesn't have any interest in it. Even if you suggested that America benefits from this, you're a propagandist, you're a conspiracy theorist. Meanwhile, they're celebrating on the other side of the Atlantic. I mean,
The most interesting analysis I've come along is by Wolfgang Streeck, who argues, look, this is just another one of these Gessler hats that the US is putting on there, and everybody has to bow to it in order to show compliance, and if you don't, you're out of the club. But it is so obvious and it's so ridiculous that it is, you know, in your face, we can do this, we blew it up, and there's nothing you can do, and there's nothing the Europeans would do. Therefore, Russia, you can see how powerful we are. We can lie straight to their faces. Everybody knows it is a lie, but nothing they can do, right? Because Sweden had an investigation, didn't publish the results. The US could have a congressional investigation or any form of like serious investigation, like the Mueller type of investigation, right? One which can really look at documents. They don't. In the European Union Parliament, Claire Daly is screaming at the top of her lungs that she wants an investigation. Nobody does one.
No, there's the Swedish investigation. You know, they went down there to investigate what happened. When they come up, they say, "Oh, we can't share this with either the Danes or the Germans." So immediately, you know, some red flags should be going up. But anyways, my takeaway from the Hertz article is once it came out, it put a lot of pressure on the United States, you know, because this Russian narrative doesn't make any sense. Why would they attack their own pipeline? They can, you know, turn off the valves. What's the point of this? And, you know, Russia want to send a message, but if they want to send a message, why don't they attack the actual Norwegian pipeline to the Europeans? I mean, this is the main competitor. No, they're going to send a signal by blowing up their own pipeline, source of revenue and influence. So it didn't make any sense. So then you have the Hirsch article, and then the Americans responded saying, well, no, it was actually a pro-Ukrainian group. We knew all along that it wasn't the Russians. Our security services knew this. But still, why did the NATO Secretary General almost threaten war on Russia then? Why, you know, effectively they admitted they've been lying to their own people. They've been lying to their partners if they knew that it wasn't the Russians. But again, the story of a pro-Ukrainian group, I mean, it's just some Ukrainians on a sailboat, you know, going out and doing this huge mission. I mean, it was equally stupid. And then, you know, the Russians come out saying, listen, we can't be trusted and you can't be trusted. Let's get the third-party neutral investigation into this. And all the Western states saying, no, we don't need that. No investigation required, even though nobody knows seemingly who it was. And making things worse, then you have Washington Post writing an article warning, listen, we have to stop talking about Nord Stream. You know, if you keep asking questions, we'll find answers. We're not going to like this answer, maybe. You know, how close is this to an admission that obviously the United States was behind this? So
I don't call it Washington Post anymore. I call it the Washington Pravda because it's basically the mouthpiece by now. Glenn,
but you have the same now with you have the same now with the war in Ukraine, because, you know, every now and then, or quite frequently, this 𝗟𝗃𝗂𝘁 nuclear plant is being bombed. Now this has been under Russian control for more than a year, and our arguments, you know, also written from Guardian to all the newspapers, they're all saying, oh, the Russians are bombing their own nuclear power plant. But why would they do this? You know, they want to send a message. Again, it's the Kremlin playbook. But you know, the Ukrainians, they have 3 nuclear power plants under their own control. Russia never bombed them, but they only bombed their own nuclear power plant. I mean, it becomes so ridiculous, the propaganda.
Bizarre.
It is bizarre, but it's a purity test, like you said. You have to show loyalty to the narrative. You have to repeat it. If you don't repeat it, then, you know, then you're a propagandist, you're you know, a conspiracy theorist, and, you know, you get squeezed out. So
no, Glenn, I think we can all agree Russia is the most suicidal great power in the history of great powers. It only attacks basically itself and Ukraine. Glenn,
but if you say it, then it sounds like you are defending Russia, which means you're pro-Russian, you're anti-Ukrainian, you've chosen the other camp. You're with them, not with us. And this is the logic. So if you're with us, you repeat the narrative and you stay away from their narrative. This is, again, there's no objective analysis. There's no interpret the world as it is. It's only, you know, make statements that demonstrate your support for our side. That's all that matters now. And this is why it's so... horrible, difficult time to actually be an academic as well.
Yeah, and that's why it's horrible to be also advocating for neutrality. You made that argument in your article back here 3 years ago that Russia is actually supporting neutral solutions on its periphery, and that itself has become anathema. And I think the war in Ukraine really proves you right. The West is not willing to accept even neutrals or neutrality in the way that it is treating right now, the way that it was treating Ukraine before, and pushing them to basically become a staging ground against Russia, and how it's treating non-allied nations at the moment, right? It's trying to push everybody in its camp, with us or against us, although this is weakening a little bit at the moment.
Yeah, so, well, after the Cold War, you had this argument that, it's the Eastern European countries who want to join NATO. NATO's just passive responding to it. And, you could make that argument because a lot of, Poland and all, they didn't really want to have a unified Europe without dividing lines. They wanted to maintain the dividing lines, but be on the Western side of it. So this is okay, a reasonable argument you can make, but it doesn't extend to Ukraine because they keep giving this image that Ukraine always wanted to escape, the shadow of Russia, but it's just a very easily proven lie because you have tens of, if not more, this polling here, Ukrainian foreign polling, they all show the same thing. From 1991 to 2014, like approximately 20% of Ukrainians wanted to join NATO. I mean, this NATO has this publication. It came out in 2011, where it complains the main obstruction to further developing the NATO-Ukrainian partnership is, they don't want to be part of NATO. They have a law which says we have to be neutral, and only 20% of the population want to join NATO. So this idea that, we were just standing there passively, they really wanted to join. What can we do? I mean, it's fake, and it's very obvious to prove that it's fake because it's the evidence is right there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the war has changed.
No one can say it. Sorry.
Yeah. The war has changed tremendously a lot there, and recent reporting has shown how everything has shifted. I mean, of course, this war is horrible. But Glenn, I would like to move on with you to the second part, if I may.